I'm joined this morning by Andrew Ware of Ursa Polaris Records, and this is a sunrise interview as part of the Helios Incubator Light program. Andrew joined us for Wave 1, which recently came to an end with the sessions. Maybe to kick things off, Andrew, let's just introduce the general concept of the project. So what is Ursa Polaris Records?
Thanks for having me. And for a brief overview, Ursa Polaris Records is that's the company that I started 8 years ago as a record label for my own projects as well as my friends' projects. It sort of blossomed and evolved over the years, and at this point, it became not currently, but a couple years ago, it sort of pivoted to a recording studio. And during that whole time, there was this sort of project in the background that was kind of an aspirational project, and that's the one that I brought to the Helios incubator. And I've been calling that Polaris, or the Polaris Music Map. And the basic idea is organizing the music industry using data visualization to make it easier for musicians and music fans and other people involved in the music industry to navigate the music industry and kind of all of the little moving parts.
Very cool. All right, so we're getting to what some of those moving parts are. Tell me a little bit more of that music background. So for context, the incubator program is designed to help take founders who have an idea for use on building on an Eos Io blockchain to refine a business model and then to develop a clear pitch deck that can be then presented to investors, whether that be the Helios investment team or even external for other investment grants that are available or other VCs. So let's step back a little bit, just paint us a little bit more of a picture of your music background.
So I started playing music, or I make the joke that I hang out with musicians because I'm a drummer. That's my little self-derogatory joke. But I've been playing drums since I was 9 years old, so that's 22 years now. And I kind of hit the ground running and played in a band immediately because the impetus was my buddy wanted to start a band and he played guitar, so I ended up on the drums. And that's actually served me really well as a musician, because most people, when they want to learn to play an instrument, they'll learn to play the guitar, and all of those people need drummers. So I've found that being a drummer has given me a lot of work within the music industry, just from people who need, or I guess you don't really need a drummer nowadays because you can get a drum machine, but a lot of people like playing with a drummer. It's a much more dynamic and exciting experience. So in that process, I started out in a band. We called ourselves Tan Sister Radio, and we were a band for probably 14 years, something like that. So spent a long time playing with those guys, and in the process, basically tried to bootstrap our own music career. So that is stuff like booking our own tours up and down the West Coast of the United States, recording our own albums and then releasing our own albums. And one of the big things that one of the big challenges we found when releasing our own music, well, there's the obvious issues with an independent project of marketing and PR, and then there's just the physical distribution infrastructure. And so we did a little bit of PR stuff, and then also worked on our own sort of handmade albums. And basically through that whole process, I've worn a lot of hats. I've touched a lot of different portions of the music industry.
Got it. So let's jump into the problem that you started to see that has now become the project that is in the Helios incubator program. So give us a perspective of what the issues, the challenges are within the music industry that you're looking to address.
Yeah, so there are lots of challenges within the music industry. And actually, if you speak to almost any musician, they will tell you there are problems within the music industry, but a lot of people see different problems. So back when I started playing music, there was a big problem in distribution, in that it was difficult to get your stuff distributed. And then there's also the PR stuff that I was talking about earlier. Now with Spotify and with services like DistroKid, it's a lot easier to distribute your stuff. However, PR and visibility is still an issue. And so the problem that we were looking into at Ursa Polaris was essentially that there is so much music out there that it's basically impossible to discover new music. You're kind of stuck with either listening to someone else's Spotify playlist, or maybe hoping for the best and hoping that while maybe listening to music on some other service, their algorithms will pick music that you tend to like. But one of the issues is that there's still quite a bit of incumbent control over that. So the large record labels are still able to craft they're still the tastemakers. They're able to get music journalists and playlist makers to pick their music.
So when you
sorry.
Yeah, just when you brought the idea, like, how did you see I'm curious, right? How did you see have visibility of the Helios incubator program initially, and what did you think? Like, did you think at that point, hey, let me see if I can build this project, or what was the thinking process that went into the application and setting this up as a founding company?
Looking at the Helios incubator specifically, or this project?
Well, both. So at what point did you decide, let me turn this into a company project? And then at what point, how does that coincide with the Helios program?
Well, I've thought for a while that the music industry needs a lot of these infrastructure changes, but it was the Helios incubator really allowed me to take kind of an idea that I had a long time ago, which was just essentially coming up with this browser for music that you can sort of look around and see all these visualized kind of instantiation of the music industry. So I had some ideas, and I've been sort of working on that in the background for years now. And then I saw the Helios incubator. I actually, back when Block One had their wasn't really an incubator, more of a VC arm, actually submitted this idea to them and didn't hear back at all, which is not that surprising, because it's kind of, especially back then, it was very much kind of in the fetal stage. But the sort of Helios was really the kick in the pants I needed to take this idea and actually explore it in a sort of startup context. I've done the previous stuff that I've done in a startup context, but this allowed me to take this blockchain idea and explore how to use that in the context of a company. Which there's the two pieces of it. There's the decentralized aspect, which is not really a company in itself, and then there's the services, which is very similar to the stuff that I've done in the past, and that would be this sort of the company aspect of it. So there's sort of the two different pieces, one of which is a for-profit, and the other of which is kind of a decentralized public good.
Okay, so the decentralized public good kind of in a summary nutshell from my perspective, is being able to collate more independent, correct me where I'm wrong, of course, independent record labels into some kind of a database where matching and filtering can happen so that music fans can manually or automatically discover more music options than they currently get from the likes of Spotify.
Yeah, that's a pretty good way to describe it. The one addendum I'd put is that it's not specifically for independent labels, but it's one that independent labels and independent artists have access to. But really the key goal is trying to organize the music industry and make it easier for people to discover new music, and also easier for people to kind of navigate the music that they already know.
Got you. And what opportunity does that create for either, let's look at investors, or for music, like musicians, music producers?
Well, one of the big opportunities for musicians is it allows musicians to, there's one part of it that I have a particular connection to as somebody who's played in dozens of different bands, which is that I don't really have any way, I mean, the closest thing I have right now is on my LinkedIn. I just have lists of all the bands that I've been in, but that's not exactly the correct context for that. That's sort of, it's kind of a weird kludge. So as a musician, for me, what this would do is it would allow me to share all of the different projects that I've been in, so that someone could see, oh, this guy, he knows what he's doing. He's been in 14 different bands. So that would sort of give me a little bit of a calling card in a way. So that's one of the value adds for musicians. For investors, the biggest thing I was focusing on in the incubator was using the data visualization as a landing page and sort of promotional vehicle for the music services that very similar to the stuff that I provided in the past with my record label and recording studio.
Got you. So musicians can get access to talent that help them to produce or distribute their music, right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
And so it's what I'd call a multi-sided platform, where you have the people who want to enjoy and listen and discover new music, and maybe understand more about the musicians that they're into, have a bit more of a deeper relationship, understand where they are, their tours, or their background, or other albums they've worked on, or other bands that they've been into. That's pretty interesting. And then for the musicians themselves, they get access to professional services or other musicians that can help them in their music production and distribution. So that's pretty clear. And, and there's a data, you've mentioned data visualization layer, where people can see something and click and go and find another connection, and kind of go down the rabbit holes and see and really explore and understand a good perspective. So that's kind of the blockchain-y kind of area, the decentralized bit. Tell us a little bit about the professional services that you can see, either that you provide or just generally, what kind of services are they that musicians would be interested in?
Well, there's a lot of needs that musicians have. So one of the big ones and one of the low-hanging fruits is just digital distribution. That's sending things to Spotify, iTunes, Pandora, all of those. And that is actually pretty well served currently, in terms of there's probably 3 or 4 very large services that provide a lot of those necessary infrastructure pieces. So what we're looking at is starting with that low-hanging fruit by partnering with someone like DistroKid, which is pretty small, but very it's small in terms of, I think they've probably only got a few employees, but they serve easily 30 to 40% of the market. And so we're looking at partnering with them to provide those basic services and then sort of expanding into other services, leveraging some of the work that I've already done. I've designed wooden packaging for like premium limited run CDs or LPs. I've also put together a let's say a different model for running a recording studio that is much more efficient and allows people to kind of share time. It's kind of like a timeshare for a recording studio. So bringing in those pieces, bringing in some of the existing services through partnerships, and then expanding to some of the other things that musicians need. For example, licensing and what's called sync, which is essentially putting music to TV shows or ads or movies, that kind of thing, which is a pretty big revenue driver for musicians. A lot of my friends who make money in music make most of their money through synchronization. And then there's other services that I think could be equally well served by a more open source marketplace kind of model.
Got you. So let's talk a little bit about like the current status. What is it that you see as the gaps? Having gone through the incubator program, you identify, we look at like market sizing and business model, revenue streams, financial forecasting, that start to look at the team that you might want to start to bring on, or defining who those key team members might be. Where do you see the opportunities of what you need to focus on next to help move the project forward?
So these are the gaps within the project as opposed to within the larger space?
Yeah, within bringing Ursa Polaris Records to market, to fruition.
Yeah, so the current status, the company itself exists, and I've been running it for the past 8 years or so. But this sort of visualized music encyclopedia, that's basically just, it's an idea that I had a long time ago. I've been working on the architecture and sort of those sorts of details for a while. Yeah, probably 4 or 5 years, something like that. As someone who, my dad is a computer programmer, my brother is a computer programmer. I have a lot of familiarity around computers, and I don't know how to speak the specific languages that well. I've done some JavaScript and sort of copy pasted little scripts and that kind of thing. But because I don't have a really deep understanding of computer programming, I think one of the big missing pieces of Ursa Polaris Records is some sort of programmer or somebody who has a clear understanding, someone who can sort of check the ideas that I've put together and understand whether that's actually achievable or not. So that's one of the big holes.
In terms of front-end development as a platform, or do you mean the blockchain aspects of it, or the token? Like, do you have a tokenomics model? Would you launch an actual token? How well defined do you think you've got with that stuff so far?
I've put a lot of work into that aspect of it. So it's it takes an understanding of a lot of different avenues in order to get those sort of tokenomic systems up and running. That doesn't necessarily require really sophisticated understanding of coding itself. It's more understanding economics, understanding the sort of incentive processes and how to do that. So we do have a tokenomic system. It's I think it's kind of cute. We like basically award tokens according to so we award fewer tokens as time goes on using a mechanism which is pretty simple. You just have a transaction counter to measure how many transactions the contract has done, and then you run that through, let's see, ln of x over x, which is sort of a combination of two different formulas, one of which is Metcalfe's law, which is the sort of how to measure a social network, which some people point it as x squared, some people point it as x times ln of x. But that to be x times ln x makes more sense. And then you divide that by the inverse square law, which applies to how light propagates, how sound propagates, how basically every physical phenomenon makes its way through the world. So if you take that x times ln of x, divide it by x squared, you cancel out the x's, becomes ln of x over x. So you take the transaction counter, run it through ln of x over x, and you get your token distribution out the other side. And that token distribution is weighted depending on if you are doing something very small within the system, like you are just editing a single piece of data, or if you are adding an entire project. So that's how that sort of system is set up. And then the tokenomics also includes the use case for the tokens. So the use case for the tokens is to stake them to a particular node in the data visualization to have that node appear more often in a sort of randomization process.
Have you selected the actual blockchain as yet? Or so you're looking for a programmer, not necessarily someone who understands tokenomics, but can help develop the front end platform. Is that correct?
Yeah, so one nice thing about this, as far as blockchain solutions go, is the blockchain aspect of it is very simple and very small. I guess there's some complexity in staking, but for the most part, the blockchain aspect is basically all you're doing is, so you're filling out all the information on a JavaScript form, sort of on the front end, and then the blockchain part, or actually even the JavaScript part, will take that, package it into a little script for, I have it designed for a graph database solution called Neo4j, which uses sort of SQL-like queries. So it basically takes all of the information that you filled out in the JavaScript input form, and then packages that into the memo field of a blockchain transaction. And then so that's the end of the blockchain part. You're basically just packaging it in a memo in the transaction. So that could really be accomplished with pretty much any blockchain. You could probably even do it with Bitcoin. But I've been looking at EOS and other EOSIO blockchains because this is a non-financialized system. And so users cannot afford to pay, even $5 for transaction fees. And if I were to put it on Ethereum, it'd probably be, even more than that. So that's one huge application I see for low fee blockchains like EOSIO, which is implementing non-financialized transactions and distributing value based on that, which to me seems to be one of the amazing promises of blockchain, that you can tokenize these disparate systems and create means for those, for like essentially completely reforming the way that industry works, sort of using these distributed ledgers.
Got you. Look, so like just from this conversation, I'm trying it in my head. I'm thinking how many different types of audience might be interested in listening to what we've got. People who are into like music enthusiasts might be very interested to hear of the platform concept that you're putting together. Musicians themselves will want to understand that there's a new platform coming. It helps them with distribution. You can have connection to those large platforms like Spotify, where they're kind of syndicating their music into those big platforms. And then the extra professional services and finding new talent and opportunities for jobs, for drum. If you're a drummer, you can find a guitarist. we've touched on general investment. We haven't deep dived into that, but we looked at tokenomics and blockchain. There's a lot of hats that you as a founder have to be able to wear. It's a long, obviously you've got a depth of experience in the music industry, and then you've built this tokenomic system and you've understood the application with blockchain. Let's maybe look at some tips, quick fire tips that you can suggest to founders. Like if someone's a founder, if they're a musician, and maybe they've got an idea for a product, what are the first things that they can start to do to understand the blockchain potential, the investment potential, besides joining the Helios incubator program, or at least applying for it? We can't take on every project. We need to filter and select projects that we think are promising ideas and the people that are behind it. But it's an opportunity for founders to apply. But what else? How do people, even if it's not musicians, how do people become a founder of an idea that's related to crypto or blockchain? A few ideas from you, Andrew.
In my personal estimation, one of the most important things in trying to reshape an industry using the blockchain is to take a look at that industry and see where the value is created. So if you take a look at the music industry and you look at where the value is created, for the most part, it's the musicians who are creating the value. And if you look at how the industry is currently set up, the value is not distributed to those musicians. The value is mostly distributed to the record labels who essentially act as bankrollers for the musicians. So they give the musicians money. They say, here, use this guy to be your recording engineer and producer because he's my buddy and he charges, you know, $250,000. So you'll have to pay for that, which, you know, is then the musician has to pay back out of whatever 10% of record sales that they're getting, maybe 20%. So taking a look at the industry, it's like totally backwards. The value distribution is kind of flipped in the way that it should not be. And as a result, we have these, well, the nice thing about music is people make music whether or not it's profitable. So it's not as if this is truly impacting people's ability to make music, but it's definitely impacting the distribution of the profits of the music industry. So as a general rule, I like taking a look at that at an industry and seeing where is the value actually created and where is it currently being distributed. And that's a good way to see if there's a decentralized solution that could actually improve the industry.
That's great. That makes me think of the idea of disintermediation, right? Which was an earlier value proposition for what smart contracts can do by helping to get rid of the middlemen that are soaking up lots of profit by being more direct to customers. And yeah, what about to investors looking where maybe they're new to Web3 or crypto blockchain projects? Any thoughts on why now is a good time for investors to pay close attention, or maybe why they should look at Eos Io blockchains in particular? You mentioned the transaction cost differences between, say, EOS and Bitcoin and Ethereum, but anything else that makes the Eos Io blockchains or Web3 in general good for investors to look at?
Yeah, I think as far as as far as Eos Io blockchains go, they have a tremendous amount of capability in terms of both scalability. You get a ton of transactions per second, relatively speaking. Like I think we're at 4,000 for EOS and probably around the same for other Eos Io blockchains. And with that, you can do blockchain transactions that you otherwise would not be able to do. So if you think about you've got a game and you use blockchain transactions to move your character around the game. If you've got 10-minute blocks and $6 transactions, good luck getting people to use that game, because it's going to take a long time to do much of anything. I was kind of imagining I don't know if you're familiar with Twitch Plays Pokemon, but it was basically like this sort of AI that was playing Pokemon using inputs from chat as inputs to Pokemon. So it hilarious. The guy's little running around in circles, can't do much of anything. All sorts of little memes that came from that. But if you wanted to control that with a blockchain, Bitcoin, you can't do it. Ethereum, yeah, you might be able to do it because it's got relatively quick blocks, 15-second blocks, maybe. I'm not sure where it's at right now. That's what I remember it as. But also be very expensive to do. However, if you were to do that on an EOSIO blockchain, pretty straightforward, half-second blocks, you could actually accomplish it. So if you're talking to investors about why is right now a good time to invest in this, and why is the EOSIO blockchain the right, or rather, why are projects on EOSIO blockchains a good bet? Why to get in right now is because, especially with all these decentralized systems, first mover advantage is huge. There's a reason why Bitcoin is the #1 blockchain, and Bitcoin Satoshi's vision is not, because Bitcoin was first. And Bitcoin has a branding. Bitcoin has the whole community behind it who's using that particular protocol. It makes a huge difference. And so investing early in these things is advantageous. As for why to use an EOSIO blockchain, currently it's the best tested of any blockchain. It's had probably, I'm not sure the exact numbers, but definitely in the order of magnitude of the most transactions of any blockchain. And that applies for EOS, Wax, Telos, and others as well, but those are probably the most used blockchains. And so if you want to look into a decentralized solution that requires the use of a non-financialized blockchain, or that's maybe not the right way to say it, but that requires non-financial transactions, you're going to have to use something like the EOSIO blockchain. You can do Solana if you want, but it keeps going down. And in my opinion, it's not as battle tested as any of the EOSIO platforms.
Great. And what we do know is that the EOS Foundation are working on a series of upgrades and updates that are starting to be shared in some new, what they're calling blue papers, exciting things, including EVM component, etc. So let's start to bring this in for a landing. Let's talk about kind of your next steps as a blockchain project founder, and let's relate back a little bit to the change. I'm curious, and for the audience, what kind of changes have you made or did you go through with the incubator program specifically?
I think the incubator program really allowed me to kind of package the different ideas that I have and define which of those is actually attractive to investors and which of those wouldn't really be something that an investor would be interested in. So there is a decentralized aspect of this solution I'm imagining, and that is something that generates its own tokens. It's I don't even have the ability to offer tokens to anybody because it's produced within the system for work, which is in terms of regulatorily speaking, the best way to do it, because if you offer tokens to people, it is potentially an unregistered security, and you might have the SEC going after you. So I don't really have any interest in offering tokens for that. And so that is not something that an investor would really be interested in. However, all of the music services to be built on top of that, those are things that investors could potentially invest in. And it's something that my company does. And so if I'm providing value, charging for that value, if I'm bringing in enough value, that would be something an investor might be interested in. I think what the incubator really helped with, I've taken startup classes before in terms of this is how you do a startup. This is, I remember in the incubator, we were talking about stuff like the business model, canvas, and other various ways of organizing your thoughts around a business. And so I had been through that, and I had used that in my previous experience with my business, but I hadn't really formed it around how to talk about that to investors. And so I found the Helios incubator to be really helpful for being able to frame, this is what investors are looking for. This is a way to communicate what it is that you're doing in a way that will excite them and actually get them to want to invest either with money or even just emotionally in a given idea or a given project.
Got you. So you're looking for, just let's do a mini job description for the person. You said you're looking for a programmer specifically. Are there any certain types of language that they need to be familiar with, or any description? And for folks at home, if you go to heliosrising.com, there is going to be a job board that has various job opportunities from projects that are part of the incubator program. Andrew maybe will work on your job description of who you're looking for and get that posted on the wall if it's not already, but just give us a little idea of the type of person that you might be looking for.
Yeah, so I have some specific languages I've been looking at just in terms of the architecture that I've set up, which involves JavaScript for the front end. It involves EOSIO for the blockchain portion. And then it uses a graph database called Neo4j. A graph database, I think, likely is a necessity, but that specific graph database is not a necessity. But it uses a pretty easy to understand query language, so seems like a good option. I think it's pretty well adopted. And then there's a very specific portion of it that I think is probably the most difficult to find somebody for, and that is a particular JavaScript library called the JavaScript InfoViz Toolkit. This guy, Nicolas Garcia Belmonte, put it together, and it's the only library that I've found that has the specific data visualization that this solution is using, which is there's something called a hypertree or hyperbolic tree, and the key is it needs to be a non-hierarchical hypertree. So that's kind of a mouthful, but so essentially what we're looking for is somebody who is proficient in JavaScript and blockchain programming and Neo4j, and who could take a look at this. Essentially all we need is something to translate the graph database layer into the JavaScript InfoViz toolkit, which uses a pretty typical JSON formatted kind of information flow. But that's sort of a general overview.
Okay, so good. So any programmer will understand everything that you've just said, even if the rest of us don't necessarily. But I understand the concept of knowledge graph, and honestly, I think it's very, very exciting to think of a non-hierarchical database that can do filtering and matching of that full scope of what you're looking to do. All of the music, but also the services that go into the entire complex music industry itself, to bring more of the profit back to where the value is actually created, which is the musicians. Anything that I haven't asked, or anything else in mind that like, let's close off with what you're excited about. bringing this to market? How long do you hope that it might take before you've got an MVP or a platform that is starting to thrive? And let's close out there.
Yeah, so let's see. So I've created like an Adobe Illustrator document that has a sort of visual representation of what it would look like. But that's not quite, it's not as compelling as actually seeing it and being able to see it happen. So as far as time horizons, it very much depends on whether this is something that I'm doing myself, which has been the case for the past however many years, 8 years that I've been running the company, or if someone else wants to jump on. I'm still going to be pursuing this as a project. But if it's just me doing it, it will be in very small bite-sized pieces. So I will work, I'll probably, the JavaScript front end's pretty straightforward. Doesn't require a lot of really intense technical testing, let's say, in the same way that the blockchain portion of it would be. The JavaScript part's not distributing any tokens, so there's not as much of a security risk. So that is one thing that I am likely to focus on, and I think would be accomplishable in 6 months or so, based on my skill sets. But if we could bring some other people on in that same time horizon, I think we could get a surprising amount done, because the structure and the architecture of this solution is actually not that complicated. It basically is like 4 pieces and then some translation layers between those, which, to be fair, I am not a sophisticated coder programmer, so my estimation of this wouldn't be that complex, is colored by that lack of knowledge.
Right.
But what's really exciting to me is not just this project that I have for music, but the idea of using data visualization to organize an otherwise difficult to navigate industry. So whenever I'm listening to podcasts, I think about, wow, look at all these people who are on each other's podcasts. You look, and Lex Friedman goes on Joe Rogan's podcast, and then Avi Loeb goes on Lex Friedman's podcast, and there's all of these connections in a similar way to how there are connections between musicians. And I see this organization of the music industry as being applicable to a lot of different industries as well. And so one of the big reasons why I want to work on this is, offer it open source and then allow other people to adopt this solution for whatever it is that they're doing. And that to me is really exciting.
Fantastic. All right. Thank you very much for your time, Andrew. I think we covered a lot of ground. Waxer will be able to help edit this probably into a few different segments as well. I think we touched on a few topics that is interesting for different types of our audience. So hopefully the audience enjoyed it. If there are questions about what Andrew is doing, if there's any developers that are interested in applying to the role or contributing in terms of the public goods components, then obviously get in touch via the job application on heliosrising.com or contact Andrew. Where can they find you, Andrew? What's the website?
So the website is ursapolarisrecords.com. That's Ursa, U-R-S-A, Polaris, P-O-L-A-R-I-S, records spelled the normal way, R-E-C-O-R-D-S.com. So that's my website. You can go there and check stuff out. Also, Ursa Polaris Records at gmail.com. It's a way that people could contact us directly. And the website has a lot. It basically has everything that we've done in the past. So if you're interested in checking out what the studio was like, or interested in the wooden album packaging or anything like that, that's somewhere you can find that. And we actually also did a bunch of video sessions with some really cool artists. There's one called Matson 2 that I think is not on the website, but is on YouTube, which is they're awesome. It's like a surf jazz twin duo. It's two brothers who play the drums and guitar. It's like a double neck guitar bass, runs it through loopers. Very cool music. But yeah, that's where people can go if they want to check it out.
Awesome. All right, good. Andrew, hopefully we can do another conversation in the coming weeks or months and see the progress as the project evolves. Again, knowledge graph stuff, I agree, data visualization, moving into virtual reality kind of, or augmented reality kind of experiences over the next 3 to 5 or more years. Very exciting. Thanks for your time and your efforts.
Yeah, thanks so much, Gabriel. I've had so much fun in the Helios incubator, and it's been super valuable to me as well. So I very much appreciate your hard work in doing that, and looking forward to what the Helios incubator can bring in the next couple rounds.
Yeah, fantastic. All right, good day, Andrew. Thank you.
Thanks.